Welcome to Season 2 of the Strain Podcast, a Southgate Media Group production, where we talk all about Guillermo del Toro's horror fantasy series, The Strain, which just started its second season on FX. I'm your host, Blaire and Graves, Director of Social Media and Associate Editor from the newly rebranded TVBinges.com, previously ShowRatings.tv. And with me today is Kyle Tremblay, the Editor-in-Chief at TVBinges.com. You can find us on Twitter at BlairLovesTV and at KyleLovesTV. Remember, Blaire and Kyle both have an E at the end. And you can also follow this podcast's Twitter handle at @TheStrainPod. Hey, Kyle, how you doing today?
Blaire, I've been searching the tunnels under New York City for an ancient tome of uncertain provenance, so I'm doing great. How are you?
I am fantastic. I am so excited to be doing the Strain podcast for a second season.
Oh my gosh, it's back. The Strain is back in our lives and has caused mild panic in the city around us.
Only mild. Just like people aren't. They know the apocalypse is happening, but nobody's acting like it, so it's just mild.
Yeah, well, we've got it from like a 1 to a 3 on the panic scale. So progress.
Oh. Sure. What is that, like purple? I don't know.
Yeah, threat level purple.
Threat level purple. Oh. So last our listeners heard from us, we did a spoiler episode where we both I reread the first book from the Strain series, and you read it for the first time.
Yeah.
That's episode 15 of our podcast. We highly recommend that our listeners go back and listen to that. But for season 2 of The Strain, we're going to be going with our old tradition, wherein I have just reread the second book, and Kyle is going in blind. So we both have completely different information. He is a sole TV watcher, and I have the information that the books gave me.
I am as blind as the children in that bus.
Oh, I gave that to you.
You did, and I took it.
Good for you.
Yeah.
So we highly recommend you go back and listen to season 1 of the Strain podcast, as well as episode 15 of our podcast, which was an extra spoiler one, but that's only if you're interested in hearing about the differences between the TV show and the book. From here on out, we are going to stay as far away from the books as possible, with my occasional interjection of, well, hey, this makes it make a little more sense. But
sure.
Anyway, today we're going to be discussing season 2, episode 1, which is titled BK, NY, which I guess is Brooklyn, New York. I'm not sure.
I hope so.
I don't know what that means. Which was written by showrunner Carlton Cuse and author of the book series Chuck Hogan. And Carlton Cuse, of course, comes from being the showrunner, I believe, of Lost, right? Or he
was the co-showrunner of Lost. He's the one who's often given credit for how efficient Lost was. In the way that it got through story really well and sort of made, in its own way, made sense. Like, it had an internal logic to it, even as crazy questions were being asked. Whereas I think Damon Lindelof, his co-showrunner, was the more like creative driving force, is my understanding.
Right. So Carlton Cuse did in Lost what he cannot do in The Strain.
Yes, and also I think Chuck Hogan has that same role in The Strain, right? Whereas Guillermo del Toro, in writing the books, was the sort of creative force. Chuck Hogan is the sort of nuts and bolts guy. So this episode, what I'm saying is basically 2 nuts and bolts guys collaborating to put together an episode of television. Which
worked in some ways and didn't work in others.
Sure. I'll grant you that.
I'll put it up front that I thought this was a 75-minute episode, although it was actually 3 minutes followed by 8 minutes of commercials, 3 minutes followed by 8 minutes of commercials.
It was about a 40-minute episode, like every episode, and just had 40 minutes of commercials tacked on.
Yeah, this is one of... I watch live television a lot, and this might be like in the top 5 memories of TV shows that just have way too many commercials.
But we should point out, first of all, that's not the show's fault.
That's not the show's
fault. That's the network's fault. We can't hold it against The Strain.
Fault.
We can't hold it against...
No, we can't. But it made it very difficult for people like you and I who did watch it live. I'm sure for people who watch it on their DVRs, it's going to be a lot easier. People who watch it on demand or on DVD later, there were parts that could have been scary or could have had jump scares, could have been intense, could have been emotional, that all fell flat because it literally was like, we're going to say 8 lines and then the commercials are going to come on. So it was a little difficult.
Yeah, although I will say, I mean, the thing with a lot of commercials is it destroys the momentum the show is building.
Yeah.
I don't know what momentum this episode would have built.
Yeah.
I just wonder, like, narratively, like, if you watch this without the commercials, which I'm sure we can do, they'll make it available on the internet after this week or whatever. I'm just wondering how much it would have improved, because the commercials are an easy excuse for that. But also, I think there were some structural issues with this episode that might go a little bit deeper than a bunch of commercials.
I certainly agree. But I do think that the first 45 minutes, I don't know how much of actual episode time that was.
Yeah.
The first 45 minutes watching it live, I thought was much stronger material than the latter 45 minutes or 30 minutes. I'm not sure how you felt about that.
Yeah, we'll get into it. We'll get into it.
Sure. So the episode begins with baby Satrakian learning the story of Sardu, who is the giant who the master took over his body to become the supposedly terrifying monster that he is, but really a comic book character, which is actually how book 1 begins. So it was sort of interesting that they would bring that they would wait to do that until the beginning of season 2.
I just like that. The season opens with baby Satrakian being told the story by his mother, which is a flashback. And then, from within that flashback, we flash back to another flashback. I like that they had the entire, like, 8-month-long break to think about it, and they settled on, we're going to open season 2 with a flashback within a flashback. which I don't think is a thing. Like, I don't think double flashback is something that really happens. So, kudos, I guess. I don't know. It was quite a way to start the season, to not just, like, I guess from, like, a I don't know, coherent television making standpoint, why wouldn't the scene just be the Sargu or whatever his name is? Why wouldn't it just be that? Why did we need baby Abraham? Like, there was no story being told there. It was just a way to set up this other story, which is what the actual thing was. Like, why did we need to flashback the first time?
Well, I think it's important that we know the person's name and have a narrator. And I don't know how you would get a narrator other than a grandmother telling a child a story.
Yes.
And, like, no, I mean, honestly, how would you narrate that with a character within the book? Or would it just be some voice? And if it's some disembodied voice, then that doesn't make any sense either, right?
Well, I'm just spitballing here, but maybe Abe could be telling it to, I don't know, Zach or one of the group, like Abe telling the story that he was told. Just as a way to sort of, I don't know, tighten it up a bit. Like, or maybe start the season in the first 15 minutes with something that is actually happening in the present, as opposed to a flashback followed by another flashback that takes, like, I think it was like 18 minutes of real time before we actually saw something in the present day, which is kind of a bold choice when starting a season. But
it was a really gruesome and kind of cool 18 minutes. I don't know about you.
Yes.
I loved. I mean, that's Guillermo del Toro genius. You know, I'm a huge Guillermo del Toro super fan. I notoriously say that in every episode. And it was beautiful art direction, pure horror. Like, it was so cool to see the master transfer bodies. Like, that, yeah. I would say that's something that you read book 1 when they told that story. In the book, they don't explain how he switches bodies. So it was really fascinating and awesome, and gross to see, you know, this vomiting of all of the worms from one body into another, and to see Sardu and to see the body, like, it makes the sort of hilarity of the master's body a little bit less hilarious. Like, he's a little I think he's a little scarier looking now that I've seen him in human form. I don't know how you feel about that.
Well, first of all, yes, and I probably buried the lead by not just opening with, it was really good. Aside from the sort of weird, and I would say clunky structure, the actual, like, the what of the matter, and, like, the worm vomit, is the only way I can describe it, was all, like, super cool. And that is because that prologue was directed by Guillermo del Toro. He directed that. That was on Twitter, which is that he directed that, and then the rest of the episode kicks in, and then it's Carlton Cuse and Chuck Hogan, or whoever directed it. They wrote it, but whatever. Like, that was Guillermo del Toro's, like, little short film, And it's the same thing because he also directed the pilot, and the pilot is one of the better Strain episodes. It has some narrative problems, but it also featured some of the coolest imagery of like the worms and stuff like that. And you just like you get a sense like if Guillermo del Toro could actually devote himself to this and like direct, like I'm not saying like pull like a Cary Fukunaga like in True Detective and direct every episode, but if he could have a more prominent role in this series, there is like a coolness that I think we miss out on most of the time with the vampires. Because I mean, look, the master looks like a frog monster. We all know it, and the vampires themselves are sort of hit or miss on actually being scary, or like in this episode, behaving like jobbers in wrestling or like ninjas in GI Joe. Like it, like, but when Guillermo del Toro like when they can actually like really like dig in and do a scene with the master or with the vampires is actually super cool. And like that was what this prologue was and what the pilot episode was. Like it actually like it made the master scarier. It made the whole thing cooler for a little bit.
Yeah, no, it makes such a quality difference of the storytelling of the show whenever Guillermo del Toro is able to get his talent in a little bit. I totally agree that that is definitely what's missing. I think we said this in our last episode of the podcast, but when you read the book, it's a very cinematic book, and that's obviously in large part because Guillermo del Toro wrote the story as he would have written a movie, and then Chuck Hogan just made it into actual like fiction form,
right?
Fiction book form in paperback. So it's very disappointing, I think, when you suddenly have. You have all this great material and you see all these cool scenes, and Guillermo del Toro does get his hands here and there within the series, and then everything kind of falls flat after that moment. Nothing is quite as scary. Nothing has quite as nice lighting or as good costume design or monster design. And it's just very unfortunate. And I mean, obviously, he's a very busy man working on Pacific Rim 2 and Crimson Peak. But I hope that at least for its third season he might be able to be more involved. I doubt it, but I hope so.
Have you pre-ordered your tickets to Pacific Rim 2? This might be confusing to listeners because you just got done announcing how big of a super fan you are of Guillermo del Toro, and since we're basically opposites, that would imply that I'm not. But in this one way, Pacific Rim is like my favorite movie, and you hate it with all your heart and soul. And so this is a weird like body switch moment where
I know. Every director's allowed a bad movie. I've decided that.
Yep.
And Pacific Rim was Guillermo del Toro's bad
Pan's
movie.
Labyrinth. Oh no, Pacific Rim.
How dare you!
I actually like Pan's Labyrinth. I'm just trolling.
Yeah, okay, good, because this podcast would end right now.
No.
Pan's Labyrinth is my favorite movie of all time. Let the record show.
Oh, I'm so happy.
Okay, I'm so glad that the rest of the world got to hear that. So, moving forward, I'm not going to get sucked into your trap, you troll.
We'll leave that behind.
So a lot of things happened in this episode. We went back to our heroes who have now gone underground and have barricaded themselves in some kind of basement. I'm not sure if I recall where they're at. Oh, are they at? Maybe it's Fett's lab. I'm not sure. They've barricaded themselves in some kind of basement, and our good friend Dutch Velders is back, and F and Fett and Nora and the whole gang. And they replaced Zach. How do you feel?
Well, considering that I would rate Zach of last season in terms of performance, presence, how much I liked him on screen, I would have rated him a 0. The new Zach has now opened the negative numbers. So he's now at about a -4 after his one line in this episode. I only imagine it's going to go downhill. I don't understand why that character exists and why you have a scene where he's just being like willfully obtuse about the status of his mom. It's like, I guess we're supposed to like kind of sympathize with him, but it's so obvious that she's a vampire monster. Like it's really hard to like see things from his side other than him just being like a difficult child refusing to accept the truth. And I think if you're gonna have like a troubled teenager, it's a real fine line you have to walk. And the strain fell off that line right at the start, and now Zach is just like a hateable character who I think everyone is rooting for him to die.
Yeah, and it's really unfortunate because obviously he's sort of the key important character in, the whole thing. Kelly, the vampire that is now gonna, be hunting them down is coming specifically for Zach. So he is the most integral character in their entire group. He's wholly related to the plot in how the master plans to get to Satrakian, and it's just like, why would you cast that little kid, that child? Like the word I want to use word I can't use on the podcast,
especially when talking about children.
That child. I know,
but it's like you go.
Oh no, go.
Okay, it's just he's so. I don't understand the casting direction, and I don't understand the writing direction. Because I get what they're trying to establish, and again, I have not read the books, so I could be way off base. But what I imagine is happening, and what it seems like they're setting up from a mile away, is that Kelly is going to be turned into an Eichhorst-type figure, who is a vampire, but who looks like a normal human. This entire episode, F is assuring a disbelieving Zach that his mom no longer exists, that she's just a totally different in state of being now, but then that's going to be contradicted when normal Kelly shows up, seemingly normal, and Zach is going to fall for it hook, line, and sinker, and F will probably have his own faith tested a bit because she'll look like his wife and that he remembers, and she'll talk like his wife and all of that. So I mean, I imagine that's where we're headed. It seems like that's a decent guess. So yeah, but if Zach is going to be that involved in the story, cast a likable kid. Write the kid likably. We have to be on his side. He can't be the whiny, snot-nosed kid that everyone hates. Like, that can't be the character. There's a time and place for that character. That's not here. This character is too important to the story for us to hate him. And the show has done nothing to make us like him. And and including this weird casting choice.
Yeah, no, he came out of the gate swinging. Like, he was just, he was angry. And, like, the way that I didn't particularly like the casting of season 1 Zach, but at least he was a child. He was cute. He was a child that asked questions. He seemed to respect his elders and respect the situation happening. Like, yes, he was scared. Yes, he wanted his mother and all those things. But, like, he didn't throw a temper tantrum while the world was ending.
Exactly.
And that's a very interesting choice that I don't know if I can get behind.
It's just tough. And this was the problem the show had in virtually every episode of season 1, which is when the characters have whiny interpersonal conflict. This came up with Nora, too, a lot. Nora and her mom and all, and, like, the whole, like, every character seemed to go through this, is that this whiny interpersonal conflict during the apocalypse. And of everyone in the world, they are the most aware of the apocalypse, and we know they're aware of it. And yet we're still having these very, like, minor conflicts. And I know, like, the kid's mom dying isn't minor, but why not write him as, like, distraught as opposed to, like, openly in denial? Like, why not engender some sympathy for him by having him be crying? Because I can't relate to him just denying what he saw. I can relate to him if he's just in his room crying. Like, I get that. Like, yeah, his mom's a monster now. That sucks. Like, okay, we're on the same wavelength. Like, it would be, like, so easy to write it like that. But instead, he's just a whiny little kid that I don't think anybody likes based on Twitter. And that's gonna be a problem going forward. Because like you said, that character figures to be an important character in the story.
Right, and I'm not spoiling anything. Obviously, Kelly gets the ability to speak, and the only thing she says is Zach. So she's clearly going after her dear one, which I think in the TV show they call them the loved ones. I think that they kind of dumbed it down a little bit.
Sure.
But like you have people who you share blood with, people who the vampires had shared blood with when they were human, aka family members. They go after them. because they want to bring their dear ones into the brood. They want to make them one of them. They want to feel that closeness to that person again. So Zach is Kelly's dear one. But again, I think it's loved one in the show. Okay, well. So, Satrakian, I got a little off course, but Satrakian, after we have that beautiful opening scene by Guillermo del Toro, Satrakian goes and meets up with Gus and gets to go see the Ancients, which is another really cool visual scene.
Yes.
That was, again, horrific. And then, again, like, it just sort of gets less horrific as the episode goes on. But I want to talk about that scene a little bit, because... we kind of immediately went from Gus being introduced to the Ancients by Quinlan, who is the head hunter, who is the speaking vampire in the cool body armor. Which, by the way, Kyle, you and I also do the 12 Monkeys podcast.
We do.
So we do the Strain podcast and the 12 Monkeys podcast. And I see a striking similarity between the army of the 12 Monkeys and the hunters of the Ancients. I don't know how you feel
in
about
that they are basically identical? Yes. Okay, carry on.
Yes. I just wanted to mention that. That's all. It's kind of incredible that on two separate networks with two separate creative teams that there would be two groups of hooded badasses who are fighting for a cause that look exactly the same.
And that also know everything. It's almost like it's a trope. Almost. I'm sure it's a coincidence.
It's the 2014-2015 trope of how badasses in hoods look. Absolutely. They got their pasty and they got weird eyes and they wear hoods. But anyway, so Quinlan takes Satrakian and Gus to go see the Ancients, where Satrakian witnesses a very horrific scene of the Ancients feasting on a gentleman who has convenient shadow over his genitalia throughout the entire scene. But there's that interesting... That's when they introduced the book, correct? This book of provenance.
Yes, which I was searching for unsuccessfully, obviously.
Yes.
Yeah, so... That's fun.
The Occidental Lumen, which is now the new plot point, which is going to be the thing they're going to be seeking for this, at least for a couple of episodes. I'm not quite sure. I haven't watched all the episodes, obviously. Well, but they now need to go and find this book. Leaving Satrakian speechless almost for the rest of the episode after he sees this gross sequence, which was a little weird because I think that what I know of him is that he would tell everybody what had happened and then he would move forward, but instead they tried to kind of play him off as a little bit weaker-willed, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I like that scene. It was a cool scene. Just the visual of the guy getting eaten by vampire monsters, always a crowd pleaser. It should be noted that the way we got there was Satrakian charging in blindly and alone after the master to the sewer, losing him instantly, and then getting immediately subdued and captured by the Quinlan and his buddy, which is sort of the way the Strain does things. We sort of get from plot point to plot point with duct tape and and glue. we sort of kind of take a couple sticks and glue them together and walk across them from plot point to plot point. But I mean, that's how the show gets around, and kind of just have to accept it. But yeah, I mean, the scene itself was good. Abraham, I mean, if I'm being generous, I would read it as maybe he doesn't quite know what to make of the fact that there's a seemingly good guy aligned vampire group out there involving the Ancients. Like, maybe he just doesn't really know what to make of it at this point. He doesn't want to confuse everyone else and make them panic. And so that's why he's withholding the information, I guess.
Yeah, I think that has to be it. It's just he hasn't really been much of a withholding character, I think, for most of the series. He's been pretty open. Well,
maybe at this point he just doesn't trust F with anything. Like he's just.
Oh well, yeah. That's F has become an alcoholic again.
Yeah.
With his very conveniently branded Svedka vodka bottle that he is drinking from throughout the entire episode. Straight, mind you, which I don't know anybody who drinks vodka straight.
My favorite little exchange of this episode was early on. F says something to the extent of, I'm going back to the lab because I was a terrible vampire hunter. And I was like, thank you. You were terrible, F. I'm glad we're on the same page for once.
Yeah, he
And
said I was a terrible vampire hunter, but I'm a great doctor.
yeah, which questionable, but you know what? I'll allow it because you finally gave in on the terrible vampire hunter part. And then like two scenes later, um, he says something like what do you mean I suck to be around or whatever, and Nora's like, yep, you do. And I was like, yeah. Like everyone this season, like the biggest change is everyone realized how useless and terrible F is. And so like
Well,
we're finally acknowledging that.
they call him useless and terrible, but then by the end of the episode, he beheads no less than 7 vampires. Like, like he between him, Fett, Nora, and Satrakian, like they take down like 30 vampires.
Yeah,
Like in season 1, they struggled with killing 1.
yeah.
And now suddenly they can just decapitate, vampires
Yeah.
left and right.
And as F noted, like I guess the thought would be now they're like experienced vampire hunters, but as F noted, he's not good at it, and yet here, again, like you said, 30 vampires, they're surrounded, but the vampires. Like again, ninjas in G.I. Joe or in any like kung fu movie take turns attacking, which is always a good strategy, and get chopped up one by one. Also, the vampires, the whole thing with them is their one real means of attack is this stinger, right? And the stinger
Right.
is like 10 feet long. Like they can deploy it from a distance, but yet the vampires, each one insists on running blindly at F and company so they can get beheaded. Guys, F and they all have swords that are like 2 feet long. You have 10 feet long stingers. Use your advantage. That's all I'm saying. Like, why are you running at them? That minimizes your advantage.
Well, I think that one thing they did establish from season 1 was that the baby vamps are really bad at using their stingers.
I guess
so. I think we have to be left to believe, at least for a couple of episodes during season 2, that there's a lot of baby vamps going around. And that's one of the things I find interesting. You actually tweeted earlier, so I'm not actually sure the apocalypse is happening. Are they sure that the apocalypse is happening? You said something to that effect. And this is the strangest representation of the world falling apart that I have ever seen, because
Yes.
there's real estate brokers just chilling. There's news broadcasts. There's like people going about their daily lives. Like there doesn't seem to be a quarantine.
We should mention, in every episode last season, we talked about how ridiculous it was that nobody was panicking.
Yes.
And so the show got that memo and has now instituted what I would call selective panic. in that when it's the random class of blind children, there is a quarantine, right? They're talking about like, we have a pass to get out of the city, we need to get to safety, yada yada. Like, okay, like that seems like a reasonable response to a vampire apocalypse. There's a quarantine, yada yada. But then, like, the real estate agent, who I assume is not, like, in on this at all at this point, is just, like, business as usual. and like, the scene where Palmer delivers a press conference and it's being broadcast in the giant TV on the street, people are just going about their daily business. Like, there's not panic in the streets. They're watching. Clearly, like, they're aware now that stuff is going on and there's like a state of emergency in New York, but business is still like carrying on. School is still happening. Like, where are we in the apocalypse right now? Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, it just, like, at this point, everyone's seen the vampires now. I assume they've killed a whole bunch of people. F mentions looting in Walmart, and he was surprised that the lab wasn't looted. So there's, like, widespread looting. Like, shouldn't this be some kind of, like, Mad Max scenario right now where people, like, roving motorcycle gangs are, like, roaming the streets and everyone is hiding in storage lockers like that one couple? Shouldn't everyone be in storage lockers at this point? Like, I just don't get it. I don't get where we are in the apocalypse.
Yeah, I think that's really fair. The show, as it did last season, this season is taking a lot of liberties with the material from the books.
Mm-hmm.
Not to get into it, but like I just finished book 2, and it's literally like in the last 5 chapters or so. It's maybe like a 20 chapter book. Is when Eldridge Palmer actually like has that press conference and starts a quarantine and all that stuff. So they're really moving a lot of pieces around to bring that from what is the end of the second book to the beginning of the second season. But that for me indicates that the quarantine and the government involvement and the mass panic is going to become more of a forefront of the story at the beginning of the season as opposed to sort of the end of the second book, which I look forward to, hopefully. But I agree. It's very poorly represented when some things are being raided and some people are trying to escape and some children are going off on quarantines and then other people are business as usual and want to go to baseball games.
Yeah.
It's very confusing. Go ahead.
Having read the first book, the way the book gets around this, at least the first book, is that it's so hyper-focused on the characters that you never really get a glimpse of the world at large in that first book. Like, we're just following characters, and so there's no, like, contradiction. It's just very matter-of-factly, step-by-step through the characters. I think with the TV show, what they're finding out is that you have to, like, the peripheral stuff matters. It matters that there's a real estate deal happening and that the woman doesn't look flustered at all, that her hair is perfect and all of that. Like, that stuff is the difference between it looking like the world is ending and it looking like business as usual. And the strain never looks like the world is ending. And even if that's not like the imminent conclusion at this point that people have drawn, it needs to look a little more like there needs to be a little more urgency here. Like, we need to see like, military on the streets. It shouldn't be people on the streets. Like, at this point, surely, you know, hundreds, possibly thousands of people have been murdered. There's looting everywhere. Like, it should be at least a police state right now in New York.
Right.
And it doesn't track with what we've seen happen on screen, with how people, just the peripherals are happening. You know, like the main characters seem urgent enough, but the peripherals don't. They're off, and yeah.
Right. Well, no, like Dutch Velders, what can she steals a bunch of food and she can only find ramen. And like, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to believe that they are like forced to be eating ramen when there are press conferences and, as you said, real estate agents who don't look flustered at all.
How do those people get to the press conference? Like, isn't there like looting and rioting in the streets? Like, if you can only get ramen, stuff has gone wrong. So why is everyone like looking great, like golf clapping during a press conference? Like, how did they get there? What are the mechanics of that?
Yeah, no, that was a very disjointed thing for me as well, and I'm hoping that, as I said, by pushing that material forward in the season or upward in the season, and by putting it in the first episode, that's supposed to be sort of our introduction to the panic in the streets, right? That's supposed to signify that, okay, some bad things are happening and that the world is recognizing it. And you're right, though, that the book one, and I would argue this for book two as well, that you are very, very isolated with your characters. Yeah. So you get circumstance of the world falling apart around them, but it's not focused on just some stranger in the street.
You never even think about it. Like, that was what really struck me, because it was like, watching season one, my thought was constantly like, why is nobody panicking? Reading book one, it's never even a thought why they're panicking, because the book is very methodical, moving from plot point to plot point about these characters. You never have time to stop and think about the world at large. And that was a choice the book made, and based on the other alternative with how the TV show's doing it, the book is clearly like made the right choice in that regard.
Right. Well, there's a lot of ways that the book made better choices, and again, we shouldn't get into it here, but go back and listen to our episode 15 of our podcast, so you can hear more about that. Because I think, for me anyway, it was very clear that Chuck Hogan and Guillermo del Toro had very good chemistry for writing a story, and I don't know that and it felt like a story that would easily translate to the screen, but I think it's starting to prove that it doesn't.
I have a book question. Since we're on the topic of book questions, I have a book question. General question, though, not a spoiler. Is Palmer's relationship with this real estate lady a book thing?
No.
Okay. I was 99% sure you were going to say that, because it's so ridiculous I couldn't imagine it being in the book.
No. That, honestly, I think that they are trying to get more women on screen.
Yeah, Dutch Velders, right?
Dutch Velders was a
thing.
female character that they created because they realized, we only have one female character with a speaking role after Kelly gets turned into a vampire.
Exactly.
So I think that they are methodically trying to interject female characters wherever they can, honestly. And, that's something I say as somebody who works in the video, film, TV industries. It's like, you got a quota.
Yeah.
You got to fulfill that quota or else the networks get mad at you.
Yeah, it's just a bit unfortunate that the two characters they invented are hot real estate lady, who doesn't seem to be mind getting hit on by an 80-year-old man, and Dutch Velders, the world's hottest hacker. Those are the two invented characters. Great.
Yes. Although, while we're on Dutch Velders, I hated her in the first season, in large part because I'm such a huge fan of the book series.
Sure.
And she's an invented character for the television show.
Also a terrible character in the first season. Just
a terrible character.
Top to bottom, terrible.
Horribly written. Yeah. The actress did not kind of know what she wanted to do with her. I think that in this episode she has settled in very well into that role. You do?
Yeah.
This is awesome. I'm so glad.
That was one of my, I assumed at some point I would say something positive, so I was saving this. I thought Dutch Velders was actually good in this.
Yeah. No, me too. She was snarky in the way she needs to be snarky, and functional in her role as a mechanical person.
Yes.
And not overly emotional, because they went out of their way, like a comment about F assuming that because she's a woman, she's going to look after Zach. And she bites right back at him saying, You should not make that assumption. I will watch your son, but you should not make that assumption that I am your traditional female.
Yes.
And where the strain may have failed to write that in season 1, they did a very good job. With her and the way that she interacts with the males around her and the way that she functions just as a professional. Well, maybe not a professional, but an expert in something. Don't sequester me to babysitter when I am this, I'm this very mechanical person who is building this infrastructure in our hideout.
Right. Well, and it's also, again, the little things. It's like that the strain often gets wrong here. Like, the difference between hot hacker and hot mechanic, you wouldn't think would be too big, but just the optics of her, working on something and not, behind a computer monitor, happily typing away, it's just the difference between her being believable and not, right? This hot blonde hacker doesn't seem like she exists in any world. It seems like such an invention. But when she's actually, working on, real things, and it just... the character seems more believable that way. And
right. Well, before she was just typing things in, and she's like, "Oh, I got the network up," or something like that. And you're seeing her practically, physically do things. You believe in her in what she does.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not like hacking isn't a real thing, or that's not how hacking actually looks. But it's the optics. There's just certain things that work on screen and certain things that don't, and the way she was portrayed in this episode is the first time in the series that character has actually made sense as a person who exists in the real world.
Mm-hmm. No, I totally agree. And I also actually, really going back to the ramen thing, she's the one who talks about the ramen. I really liked that also sort of grounds her. If you know anything about hackers, when they go into hiding, they eat whatever they can eat. And, I just have friends who are hackers. So not that they've all gone underground like that.
Wow.
But the idea that Red Bull and ramen, it's just that's such a real thing to me. Sure. Of people who will hunker down for 48 hours and type code and just make themselves microwavable ramen and drink Red Bull to stay awake. That is just so within the realm of reality for me that there's just all these little things that she did where I was like, oh, it actually seems like they know what they're writing about, and she's kind of figured out how to portray that. So I thoroughly enjoyed her for the very first time. Having just read the second book, which is my favorite of the 3 books, where she doesn't exist, and I'm okay with her. So I feel that's a big kudos, that's a big applause for me. Progress! But on the other hand, you have Nora, and I don't know if I am very thrilled with what they did with Nora in this episode. Which I understand that they needed to make. I'm glad that they reestablished her as a scientist and tried to kind of put her in perspective in that way. But I don't know that it was is it a MacGuffin that she said, you guys should come with us and you should come and stay with us? Because that doesn't feel like something Nora would do. Is MacGuffin the right word, or that's the wrong word?
I don't know. It could go either way, honestly. Although it very well might be. I honestly, until you mentioned Nora, I had forgotten that Nora was in this episode. She does not play a very prominent role. She's F's loyal sidekick, I guess.
Right.
And apparently Master Vampire Slayer when surrounded by a group of 30 vampires, as with everyone. Except the old couple who are there just to get bit.
Right. Well, but that was the whole thing. The old couple was just there to be bit, and then she is only in that scene to invite the old couple to be with them before they get bit, and then for F to go, oh wait, she just got bit. We could try to stop the infection.
Yeah.
And that's just and I was right. I looked it up. A MacGuffin is a plot enabling device.
Yeah.
So those characters were there. Nora was solely there to, for some reason, sympathize with those characters, which doesn't make sense with Nora's character for me at all. That she would invite strangers into their home, into their nest.
Yeah.
And then, but then ultimately they do take them back because they need to do experiments on them.
Just a bigger question. What is Nora's character in the show?
In the show?
Give me 3 adjectives to describe Nora.
Scientist.
That's a noun. 0 for 3.
Oh, crap. 3 verbs. Wait, 3 what?
Adjectives.
Adjectives, okay.
Science-y.
Scientifically inclined.
There you go, that's one.
Okay. That's one. Lover. She's a lover to F.
Sure. Also a noun, but okay. I'm just saying, like, I'm not trying to put you on the grammar spot here, but it's just like it's kind of hard to describe that character, like who that character is. You tend to, as you did, describe her by what she has done, because that's easier, because those are things that have happened. But like, what are Nora's motivations? What does she want? What does she care about? Who is she? Well, like in this episode, it's like there's just nothing.
And last we saw her, she killed her mother. So
yeah,
you remember
heroic? I don't know.
She's supposed to be heroic,
I guess. But isn't everyone in this group, like, Fett, heroic, Dutch Velders, heroic, F is the only one who you might not describe as heroic, ironically enough, although he probably
Alcoholic,
occasionally heroic. Like, isn't heroic sort of the general descriptor of this group because they're fighting to save humanity? It's like, yeah. I need more from that character. Like that character should be prominent. As you mentioned, the show has a real problem writing women, considering the other woman in the group is a world famous hacker. That character needs to ground F, needs to ground the show, the Nora character. Like we have the the Russian accented pest control, the real hero of the show guy. Like everyone's kind of broad and sort of the old master who uses his sword to chop vampires' heads off. Like Nora's supposed to be the grounding character, and it's just totally flat.
Yeah, if you were gonna do like a Joseph Campbell breakdown of what each character was, Nora would be like the best friend, the advisor, type character. She would be the Han Solo, which she clearly, or I guess no, she wouldn't be the Han Solo because Han Solo you meet. He's the friend that you meet. She would be the Sam Gamgee from Lord of the Rings.
Oh wow.
Which interestingly enough, that actor was in season 1 of The Strain who played Sam Gamgee.
I don't have any Lord of the Rings references. Would Fett be the Han Solo of this show?
That would be the Han Solo.
Yeah, Fett would be the Han Solo.
He would be the Legolas, or the Han Solo.
We're not going into Lord of the Rings. I can live in the Star Wars universe. We're not walking over to Mordor or whatever it's called.
Yes. All right. So yes, Fett would be. Nora would be the C-3PO, which is a terrible.
That character makes sense now.
Okay, or the R2D2. She might be the R2D2. Might be a better description because I think Luke had R2D2, right? He got C3PO later, but he had R2D2 originally.
That's about right. R2D2, because you could literally replace her dialogue with beeps and boops, and it wouldn't have changed our understanding of the character.
Yeah, which is really unfortunate, as you said. They're still struggling to write female characters, and I think they're trying to add a maternal element to Nora. But like when we left season 1, she killed her mother, and she was hardened, and she was distraught, and she didn't seem to have a lot of that empathy left or that maternal instincts. That feminine, she's the very overtly feminine energy to F's very masculine energy, and I just I'm not and I don't think it's the performance. I think we agreed in this last season that we didn't think it was the performance. We thought she's just terribly written. That they don't know what they want to do with that character. And you're right, I had trouble coming up with adjectives for her, so I went straight for nouns.
That's right. I mean, the character is clearly an important character, but they just don't know. They don't have any means of making her distinct, or they don't have really either the ambition or the courage to do anything with her. Like anything just outside, the way that like they might feel okay about taking liberties with Dutch, like giving her like a little like romance with Fett or whatever, like a little bit of tension, because that's a character they feel like they have ownership of. I just feel like Nora is a character they're just sort of letting go off on, just be basically a story cog, and that's about it.
Right. Well, and that's exactly how I felt about her in this episode when she invites strangers to come to live with them, because they're going to run into people all the time, and the hardened character that we left is not the kind, open arms character that we came back to in season 1.
And I mean, inviting strangers to live with you is basically kindness to a fault, like empathy to a fault, and that is not at all what we've seen from her to now. Like if that was this, like I think we saw it at the start, and then she sort of learned that that's going to get us killed. And when she killed her mom, that was a sort of killing of that part of her character. And so you would think we'd be on to something new by now. But alas, we're back to where she was in like the pilot.
Yes, but it did lead us to something very interesting, which is something they did not do in the books, which is they're going to try to cure somebody. Which is really cool to inject a little more science into the story, because...
Wait, are they? Yeah. I didn't think so. I thought they were using... I thought the old couple was being used for research purposes, but not as an attempt to cure.
I thought that the heavy implication was that they went back to their lab to try to figure out if they had any diseases, and they need a disease to kill the strain of the vampirism before it can fully infect a person. So they need to inject them with a disease that they have at their lab.
Okay, yeah. I was having trouble with the word cure, because I think the best scene of the episode, in fact, was the lab scene with F and Nora, where they actually do science things, and F realizes that the way to cure this isn't to come up with a cure, it's to come up with another disease. And that was like clever.
Yes, but is also the plot of the movie World War Z.
Yes.
Not exactly. The book World War Z, but is also the plot to the movie World War Z.
I've seen the movie World War Z, and yes, that is the plot of the movie. but
so good originality, everybody.
I didn't say it was unique. I think if you're coming to the strain for uniqueness in storytelling, you've probably found the wrong block of New York. You're in the wrong borough. But yeah, I mean, I just liked that people were actually being smart. It's such a rare thing on the strain for people to be smart, and I like that. And so yeah, you're right. They are trying to save them. They aren't trying to cure them in the traditional sense. They're trying to develop another disease to infect them with that kills this disease as a sort of roundabout way to save them. Which will probably
almost certainly lead to a very interesting second episode.
Yeah. I like that. I like that idea.
Oh, I do too. I think that's brilliant, and that could have been really cool in the books as well. But I like it. I like this as a show a very unique show aspect. Like I'm starting to adapt to Dutch. So before we end, I have 2 quick notes. I wanted to talk about Eichhorst and Kelly, and the feelers. How did you feel about all of that?
I have no idea what that scene was, but it looks cool, which is good enough for me. And I definitely like the use of Kelly. I think we talked about this last season. It's pretty clear this is where it was headed, which is Kelly gets her, not her humanity, but her human-like abilities back, becomes an Eichhorst type figure. So that wasn't really a surprise that that's where we were going with this. But it's cool all the same. I like that direction for the plot. I think it's interesting. So yeah, I liked it.
The feelers, I don't believe this is a spoiler thing. I think this is I have information from the books that made it make sense. That doesn't make sense to everybody else. Because in the books, it's also very horrific, and they decided to omit the horror in this, which is a little upsetting. But the feelers are those blind children.
Oh, okay. I kind of figured.
Yeah. But, so the blind children were all taken to a vampire factory, which Palmer just secured with the woman real estate lady. So they were taken to a vampire factory, and they were made into vampires to sort of work with Kelly and the other conscious vampires. So they because they're blind, they're going to have different use of their senses, basically, and I think that's as far as I can go with that. But
I see.
In the books, like, it's really scary when the children disappear and all that stuff, and they don't talk about like, oh, and they suck their blood and they put the strain into them and all that stuff, but just sort of like the fear in them is palpable in the books, and I thought they kind of dropped the ball here.
Well, I think they had to be really careful, because I know when I saw a randomly introduced out of thin air school of blind children and their bus gets captured by vampires, that made me a little bit queasy, because it's such innocent victims that have not been established on the show. And I sort of worried for a second that we were just going to watch a school bus full of blind children get slaughtered. Which was like, it's like, really? Like, that's what we're doing? Like, I don't know. Like, it's great to be a horror show and all, but that's just like violence for the sake of violence. And so I think they probably realized that if we actually like show anything happen to these poor kids that we just introduced 5 minutes earlier, it's going to be really distasteful. And so they kind of wrote themselves into a corner where I didn't even like fully get that the whole feelers thing was them, just because it's like they couldn't show it. And so that's one of those things where it's like tough to, they sort of wrote themselves into a corner.
Absolutely. And they tried to keep it classy, which I can applaud them for. But I think that due to the time constraints in the book and how you semi-do it in the show, how they did it semi in the show, is you all see it from the perspective of the blind counselor. The woman who's like leading them, and she's like, oh, I can't see either. This doesn't sound like where we're supposed to be. And you get like 6 interludes with her in the book. So you kind of experience her, you experience them die, but like you can't see or hear, and there's like, so there's all these parts of that happening that you can't experience because she can't experience it. So it's a really cool part of the book, because just the way that they describe it. But I think you're right, that they kept it classy by not really doing that. But I don't think that I felt I don't think I felt anything for that counselor either. Like, she was nameless, she was generic looking, and she's gone now, and that's all I know.
Had they established the kids last season and like made them characters that we care about, they might have been able to buy themselves some like real estate to work with in terms of what we actually saw, because you can't introduce them and then 5 minutes later kill them. Like, you can't do that. So had they, laid a little more groundwork, I think, and made us feel like real sympathy for them. And I think the more groundwork you lay, the more you can show in a way, because then we don't feel like it's cheap or like exploitative. Right. But I guess if barring that, they did it about the only way they could, short of just rewriting the concept, which probably would have been the better option, honestly. Because like, it didn't come across, right? Like the idea that these are the blind kids and all that, like that didn't really, like, they didn't convey that idea very strongly.
Right.
And that was I think, if that's going to be the case, then you probably want to rewrite the idea behind the scene and come up with something you can show. But again, I mean, I think what they did is probably better than just being like exploitative and icky. So.
Oh, absolutely. But I mean, that's why I wanted to bring it up, is because I felt watching the TV show that if I didn't have that knowledge, that I would have no idea what had happened.
And I didn't. So good.
Yes. So hopefully we can enlighten somebody else.
Yeah.
Okay. So before we go, I think we had interacted with a couple of people on Twitter. Am I correct?
Oh yeah, we've been tweeting people all night. It did well on Twitter. The premiere was trending like number 3 or so in the United States.
Yeah, it stayed number 4 actually through the hour past the episode, which is really good.
Pretty good.
But yeah, so everybody has been tweeting at us, and overall, it seems like everybody really enjoyed the episode. I would say one thing that you complained about a lot is the same thing that everybody else complained about, which is that wig.
How did we take an hour to get to wig talk? I have let everyone down. Because
wig talk.
At least 25% of my feed tonight was devoted solely to Ephraim's wig. Like, we went deep on the wig. A lot of people have a lot of opinions. I want to thank all the wig heads out there for weighing in, helping me out. It's going to be a struggle this season. We know at some point from the previews that I don't think it's spoiling anything to say that F loses the wig, finally. But until...
I don't know under what context that's going to happen.
Nope, who knows? But the previews they've shown, he doesn't have it. So, I mean, the wig's only going to be with us for a few more weeks. But that means a few more weeks to ponder over its existence, over what it means, over whether the wig itself is balding, whether F is dyeing the wig. The big questions. The wig really makes us ponder the realities of life and the frailties of our existence. And so it's only going to be
existential wig.
Yeah, right. It's an exterior and existential item. And so yeah, I mean, just the wig is a presence that's going to be leaving our life shortly, I imagine. But while it's here, we might as well all appreciate it and be horrified by it.
And acknowledge it. It must always be acknowledged.
That's the number one thing. We need to acknowledge its existence and that it is still in our lives for the time being.
Okay. That was wonderful. So I would like to make 2 quick notes that are related to the book but are not in any way, shape, or form spoilers. But I just want to give everybody the opportunity to tap out now if they don't want to hear them. But I had 2 notes that I wanted to address with you really quickly.
Let's do it.
Because in episode 15, I keep dropping that number, you and I discussed the differences between book 1 and season 1. Mm-hmm. And we both found out, and I remembered, that Eichhorst is not in the first book. And for a while, I was questioning myself as to whether or not that character actually existed in the books. But do not fear, he does exist in book 2.
Hey!
So I just wanted to clarify for everybody that Eichhorst is not... I did not drop the ball on that.
Good.
And then also, the scene that I was constantly referring to in our first season of the podcast, the scene that I was so excited about, is also from book 2. Is the closing scene from book 2.
Wow.
The scene that kept me awake for 4 days, where I had to sleep with a light on, is also in book 2. So I apologize to everybody for going on and on and on about a scene that did not exist.
No, that's good. 1. That's good, book expert. I'm glad we sorted that out.
Well, hey, I learned from my mistake, and I reread it before the TV show came back for its 2nd season instead of after this time.
Absolutely.
So
you're on top of it. And without you, I would literally not know what's happening. So I'm glad.
No, and I literally would forget a lot of stuff because I feel like I need a lot of information from the books, which is a little unfortunate to put pieces together in the TV show.
Yeah.
Do you have any notes that you would like to give everybody before we close out?
No, I mean, my only note, I just opened a WordPad document at the start of this and wrote in 46-point font, wig talk, and we got to it. And so my notes are exhausted.
I'm going to call that hashtag Wig Talk. I think that should be a thing that we do on Twitter every week, so everybody please join us.
Oh, next week I am on it.
For Wig Talk. All right. This wraps up our 16th episode of the Strain podcast. I'm going to wait because there's a siren behind me.
No, it was good sound effects.
Oops.
Keep going. I'm not editing this.
Okay. Oh, gosh. This wraps up our 16th episode of the Strain podcast. Before we go, I want to mention a few things. You can download and subscribe to our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. You can also hear all of our podcasts at our website, southgatemediagroup.com. Please subscribe to the show and also rate us. Follow the show on Twitter at @TheStrainPod, and Kyle and I at @KyleLovesTV and @BlaireLovesTV. Remember, both Kyle and Blaire have an E at the end. Send us fan mail at thestrainpodcast@gmail.com, and check out our website, tvbinges.com, to find and join our monthly binges and create your own. Also, side note, our upcoming binge on July 26th at 1 p.m. Eastern is the X-Files binge. We've put together 9 episodes that are canon and we think will be reflected in the X-Files revival. So please go to tvbinges.com. Please go to tvbinges.com for the episode list, and we hope to see you on July 26th on Twitter with #XFilesBinge. Thank you again for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.